Welcome, everyone. My name is Karen Strub, and I'm the Vice President of Communications for Infrastructure Resources. I'd like to welcome you to our Excavation Safety Alliance Town Hall, Defending Utility Damage Claims. Our ESA town halls are an open forum to discuss concerns and present potential solutions to try to improve damage prevention and excavation safety. If you have a question during the town hall, please either type it into the chat or click the raise hand icon, give us a few seconds, and we'll give you permission to unmute yourself. To unmute, you'll simply click on the microphone icon in the top right corner of your screen. Today's meeting is meant to be a discussion, and you're all encouraged to ask questions and share solutions. Please try to keep your comments brief to allow others time to interact. And know a recording of this town hall will be posted on the ESA website, along with a brief blog post and chat log. If you comment through chat and you do not want your comment or name to be included, please note that with your post. Today's session will conclude at 11:30 a.m. and I'm pleased to have our panelists who bring a wealth of experience, and I'll allow them to give some background before we begin the conversation. Wayne, would you like to begin?
Sure. Appreciate everybody joining us in this conversation. I've spent many years as a contractor, and now I serve the insurance industry in working with contractors who have had claims. So I've run local excavation task forces and damage prevention partnerships in the Tampa Bay area for about 15 years. I appreciate having an opportunity to share with you.
Thank you very much. Kenny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. And again, thank you for letting me be part of this. I feel like this is an honor to be able to share experiences and a little bit of information. My name's Kenny Deeson. I'm area manager for a company that does utilities across the United States, Team Fishel. I have been in this industry for 44 years now. Half of my career was in telecom and the other half has been in power. And for many years now, I've dealt with the fallouts of being able to locate or not locate and do things in a right and efficient way. So glad to share my thoughts on this, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Fred?
I'm Fred Lesage. I'm a construction risk engineer for AXA Insurance. I work in the North America construction business unit. I work with our customers on a variety of risk mitigation efforts, including damage prevention. This particular area is something I've been interested in and paid a lot of attention to for the last 15 years or so. I like to say that probably other than painters and drywallers, every contractor that we insure puts a shovel in the ground at some point or another. So we have a lot of interest in this particular topic.
Thank you very much for all three of you. We did receive a question in advance of this topic when the topic was announced. So the question is, if a fiber optic cable or conduit is physically only 1 to 3 inches wide, depending on the conduit's actual diameter, how does this affect the determination of accuracy of locates placed? They had an example that followed up. They said, if the locator puts down a locate mark that implies a single 2-inch facility is 2 to 3 feet wide, is that appropriate? Because that implies the tolerance zone is significantly larger than actual. And does this create unnecessary costs for the contractor to verify the presence, especially when the excavation is under pavement to verify? So Fred, I'll begin with you on that question.
Yeah, there's a lot of complexity to this, and I would say that every situation is unique. One of the things that I thought about in this particular case is that in recent years we've seen a lot of excess capacity being put in the ground. So when an excavation happens, they're putting in additional conduit capabilities with the idea that at some point you may have growth. So you might have a single fiber that's running through a conduit, although there may be multiple spare conduits in that same right of way, that we don't want to damage those either, which could be a reason for this. And I'm speculating again because I don't know the details exactly. Certainly if it's beneath pavement and you have to expose it, it's going to increase your cost to try to expose whatever it is that you're crossing or running parallel to. I think the determination of liability is probably not going to be affected. If the locator's told you that he's telling you it's a 2-foot wide space, in most jurisdictions, I think you're going to find that the tolerance zone would be increased. And we have seen these cases of this sort of marking being done, which does definitely increase the tolerance zone, or the width that you'll have to dig safely in. There's no question that that is the case. I would advise you to, if you get in a situation like that, to contact the locator or the utility involved and try to get some additional assistance with that. There may be reasons that they have to mark it that wide that we're not aware of, including difficulties in locating sometimes beneath pavement like that.
I think it all goes back to communication, which I know, Wayne, you're very big on. Did you have anything that you'd like to add for that question that had come in prior to the event?
Well, the big deal is the difficulty of locating. It's got to be a panic situation for many locators. It's more fuzzy science than exact science. So when they expand what amounts to tolerance zone because of their care and concern about where it's actually located, I actually would rather that happen than inadvertently hit it, even though I might not be blamed for the damage.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Project planning doesn't always follow the same steps at every company. Kenny, can you briefly explain the timeline that Team Fishel uses from engineering to execution?
There's from an engineering process, there's a lot of time that goes into the engineering piece of it, and with Team Fishel, the projects that I'm currently managing here in the greater Tampa area are projects where engineering and both construction work together in-house for us, and being able to engineer those projects in a timely manner, getting with all the customers, making sure that everybody's happy prior to anything going in the ground is huge. And then once that takes place, we're able to come in and set up those locates. And it's all about the customers, the customer you're working for, and the customers that are in the field, because certain projects give a lot more due care to those customers in the field and inconveniencing them as well. So a lot of that is out of the picture right up front, with agreements with those particular customers. But being able to come in and then locate using a SUE company to come in and be able to identify things that are in the ground that those customers, obviously, you and I would not want anything any different if it were our house that they were working in front of, and being able to try to mitigate some of those hazards, and finding that stuff is really important.
We've got some things going on in the chat right now, and we're talking about some state-specific laws, and they're talking about tolerance, distance, and tolerance zone. And one of the things that came up in our conversation was, Fred, we talked about how many companies work within multiple states, and sometimes on the same job, they can be in more than one state. Can you speak briefly to the awareness and recommendations you have for them as it deals with the differing state laws?
Yes, and it's not only the states. I mean, some of the states have multiple 811 organizations within the state that have their own laws and regulations related to those things. So I think it's very important when a contractor moves into a different jurisdiction that you need to understand that there are differences in the law. When we talk about excavation in particular, things like tolerance zones and wait times and whether you get a positive response are all functions of what is required under the 811 law for the jurisdiction where you're working. So when you're moving into a new territory, it would behoove you to review the regulations for that space. There's a great resource out there, call811.com is a website you can go to that will link you to the 811 websites for all of the providers within the US. And so that's a really good resource to look at. And they'll break it down into some really fine, just the key bullet points. You can get into the depth of the law if you want to, but if you don't want to do that and you just want the key bullet points about where you, how you call in your ticket or report your ticket online, how you verify that the ticket's been completed, what your responsibilities are as far as white lining or your wait times, all of those sorts of things. They're all available to you there. It's certainly true for any aspect of your business when you move into a new jurisdiction. States all have their own laws. Contract laws are different. Work comp laws are different. So you really need to understand that when you're moving into a new jurisdiction, all the possibilities that that you may encounter when you go there. It may not be the same as what it was in your home territory.
When I think bringing up the multiple call centers, being that you're in Illinois and you have multiple call centers,
We have two in Illinois. That's correct. Yeah, that's one place where we do. I think there are 50. I want to say there's 53 organizations within the U.S. I think that's right. Might be 54.
I know as you're talking about the different things that can bring up positive response, and Wayne, you've spoken before about positive response review. Would you discuss that as a training tool that can engage the field crews on verifying their job site?
Well, we have found through experience with literally hundreds of contractors that review the positive response in the field are many times less likely to have a damage. It happens a lot that the positive response, the paper printout, gets handed to the crew so they can put it in their job packet. So if somebody challenges, do you have a ticket, they can pull it out and say, yes, I have a ticket. But you ask the same crew what the positive response is, and they don't know, which means it hasn't had a priority to review the positive response against what they see in terms of locate marks on the ground.
I think one of the things too is explaining the why they're doing what they're doing. So, explaining what they have to do, but once someone knows the reason behind it, it can change their whole perspective on things. So we had Jordan Partlow comment and say, I know that his company works in multiple states as well. Like you have to do that pre-planning and you have to be doing your due diligence before you would begin that job. So
it very much comes into play when we're trying to defend claims too, that we have claims handlers who are familiar with the various jurisdictions that they cover. In fact, they're often specific to a particular jurisdiction or two. So when we're trying to resolve a claim or we're trying to defend something, we have to have that knowledge on our end of things too. So the more you can do up front, the better off we're all positioned when the time comes that we need to defend that claim.
And as we go to the root of this town hall and defending that, Wayne, as we begin to look at the damages from that insurance perspective, what's on your wish list for companies to have in place throughout their job process?
Well, if a company doesn't have photos of the locate marks on the ground, the chances of successfully defending a damage are decreased many times over. So the way you check to see if their positive response was reviewed basically is a check to see if there's pictures. So we encourage our excavators to use the positive response and more as like a job hazard analysis tool, only we're trying to see what the hazards of damage relative to damage are with each facility. One facility at a time. Here's Frontier, here's Zayo, or whatever. Take pictures of the Frontier marks. Take pictures of the Zayo marks. So there is focus on each individual facility and what we need to do to prevent damage. So the big deal about the tolerance zone is it's a regulated mechanism to keep the contractor from being forced to dig up the whole site. The law restricts where the contractor has to use great diligence in digging carefully in the tolerance zone, but it's a mechanism of advancing production for the contractor. So it's a little bit of a conflict, because when do you stop looking for a facility? Are you good at 25 inches instead of 24? What about a foot? So every contractor has their own practices of how far they go to identify a facility, and I'll let Kenny speak to it. But I promise you, if they know power's in the area, they're they're going to locate it before they do anything.
So to Linda, what Wayne is saying, due diligence, which I've heard, I think all three of you make the comment or use that term, is key here, because if you don't find something with a practice of soft digs or a practice of potholing or whatever your company is going to be doing to identify these things, and you make a decision to go, hey, we don't find it, we're all fine. Well, at the end of the day, you're not going to be fine when you hit a 6-inch gas line or a 20-inch force main or anything like that. You're going to be liable for it, and exercising a due diligence is most critical. And in most cases, if our teammates aren't able to find it, the final decision is up to me to say, okay, it's okay for you to go ahead and dig. And I can honestly tell you, I have never made that call because I won't do it. I just flat won't say, go ahead and dig, because it's not where we say it is. Recently, we had a subcontractor that is no longer working for us make that call themselves out in the field and wound up hitting a gas main, a 6-inch gas main that shut down Interstate 75 down in the Rusk in South Hillsborough area of where we work, and cause all kind of problems. So again, like I said, they're no longer working for us, and nobody got to actually make that call internally for us. And these are mistakes that can't be made. You have to at times put your foot down and just say, I'm not going to do it until I locate it. And in most cases, I shut the job down and say, back up, get locators out there. Let's do whatever we can do to find that utility, or at least clear a window of a path that we can get through safely, and we know that we can get through safely.
I do want to go back to the photography that we had discussed a little bit, but Wayne, we had a question that came in specifically for you. Would it be good for one-call centers to have a positive response checklist to be printed with the ticket as a tool for field crews?
Well, that's an absolute great idea. And going into the positive response, the listing of the utilities and the positive response, it's kind of a checklist. What I think would be great is to have a checklist where the excavator could click the box that would report back to 811. Yeah, we checked that. And it's just a tool to get people to think through, what does this positive response mean? There's tons of contractors that don't understand that, the code that says, agreement with contractor, when it's not so, it just means that there's no locating done. And in fairness to utilities, a lot of times there's not a great way of telling the contractor, I just can't get to it. So any response back that causes the contractor to think through, what does it mean when we have various unmarked responses.
And tag it on to what Kenny said too. Like, if you don't have marks, within some state laws, you're allowed to dig after a certain period of time, regardless of whether you have marks or not. And whether it's advisable to do that or not is probably, I would say no. Yeah, they should have it marked for you by that time, and you don't want to delay your work. But like Kenny said, if you end up shutting down an interstate highway or shutting down an airport, which we've seen claims that did that, cut power to a community of 20,000 people. We've seen claims that have done that. You don't want to do that. I mean, it's just, you're going to leave yourself in a bad spot. One other thing I wanted to mention too was, we haven't talked about this. We've talked about 811 locates a lot, but we need to think about private facilities too. Somewhere around 40 or 45% of buried facilities are private facilities not covered by 811. And a lot of times it's because it's on private property or near an easement. So we have to think about some of those things too. I'm familiar with a near miss on a hospital oxygen line. A line ran from the oxygen plant outside the hospital into the hospital, and we'd done 811 locates, but the contractor hadn't recognized the fact that there's private underground facility there. We could have cut off the oxygen plant from the hospital. So there are things of that nature. So you need to think about that, particularly around industrial complexes. A lot of times, like college campuses will have a lot of their own private buried facilities. And so we need to be aware of those too going in, because those result in claims too. And they're harder to defend if you haven't located them.
I know that we have one calls participating on the call, so they've certainly heard about the suggestion or the thought of adding the positive response checklist to be printed with the ticket as a tool for the crews. So maybe that's something that they can talk about as they collaborate either with other one call centers or some of their liaisons. But it's also been pointed out that the call centers do have damage prevention liaisons that are there to educate. So if you do have questions, call them, and that's what they're there for. That's part of the resource and the education that they offer. But going back to the photography piece, I mean, when we talk about it, that, you know, the pictures are really what can help you. Software solutions for that photo storage have been referenced in our previous town halls. Fred, would you speak to some of the ease that can come from using a software provider who will help with documentation on your job site?
Certainly. One of the issues we've had with trying to defend claims in the past has been the retrievability of the information associated with those excavations. So when the claim comes in and the work has been completed for a year, 18 months, when the damage gets discovered, and that does happen, we get power lines get nicked, gas lines get nicked, and it gets discovered in a later time when either a fault of some sort develops or it's excavated for another purpose and it gets discovered. The utilities will go back to their dig ticket histories and identify folks who'd been excavating in that space. If we want to defend that claim, you need to be able to retrieve those pictures that Wayne talked about and other documentation, whether it's your project plans, your whatever job reports you have from the crews who are working there. That can be a real challenge sometimes, and Kenny could probably talk about that in some detail as well. But there are a number of software solutions out there that will allow you to collect photos of the job site in the field, and in some cases documents as well, and tie them to a date and time and a location, which makes that somewhat easier. DocuSite is one that I know of. Rakin offers a feature within their application to do it. There are others. I'm certainly not endorsing those two above others, but yeah, that's a very useful tool to have. It's a thing that it increases the cost of defending a claim. If you think about it, when you have people in your office digging through records trying to find photos of something, sometimes that's job that somebody's doing, and you're paying those people's wages to get that done. So whatever you can do to expedite that process makes the defense a less expensive effort. I guess that's really hard when you go back and you're saying, yeah, well, our foreman took photos of that job site 12 months ago, but he doesn't work here anymore. We don't know where his phone is. I mean, those kinds of things are frustrating, and they can add to the cost of the claim eventually.
I think that's one of the things that's completely relevant. We've talked about digging through the records or who has that, or did somebody upload the information? Kenny, I know you guys are transferring to all digital. Do you want to talk about that process and kind of what led to the decision to do that?
In a lot of ways, just storage of paper, you know. I mean, I have actually gone back as far as 8 years one time, digging back for a file that come about with a resident that lived out of town, you know, and was only here a couple of months out of the year in Florida. And it took that many years for his sewer to back up for a directional bore hit that had went through it. And why, goodness gracious, I've never had one that long before, but that was a long period of time. And fortunately, we were able to retrieve, and we were all paper, you know, back then. But since then, the company has made the decision, obviously, to go paperless. And all of our jobs, every work order is all information, whether it be locate tickets, positive response tickets, pictures, invoicing, whatever it is, goes into an electronic job file. And you know, some of the other things that just recently we've started getting in on is you know, being able to take drone footage, you know, prior to jobs, after jobs are complete, just as, you know, a lot of times after a job's done, you get a phone call. Hey, the company that you did that work for, the utility, says, Miss Jones out here is saying that you broke her driveway, or that you've done this or you've done that. And it's just good business to make sure that you're documenting everything out there on your job. And in the end, it's going to save you money. It's going to give you the ammunition, as Wayne said, for you to fight the case. And like Fred is also saying, and being able to document. We also have GPS on all of our vehicles, and we're able to also timestamp when we were there, who was there, what truck was there, and use everything that's out there and it's available. Is it costly? Yes. I'm not going to say that it goes without some sort of cost to you and your company, but all it takes is one real good damage for you to incur that cost that you could have used wisely up front to save yourself some real grief down the road.
Yeah, my company's paid numerous multi-million-dollar claims as a result of a utility strike. So when you think about the investment in the kinds of efforts that Kenny's talking about there, that's what you're protecting against, and it's reputation for your company when you have one of those events too. So it's really vital that you do it.
Wayne, did you have something you'd like to add?
Yes. In terms of the documentation, everything we're talking about relative to the importance of the documentation and doing it right for defending a claim is exactly the same things we need to do to prevent a claim. So we're finding that take pictures of the marks is more of a way to put our field crews head in the game. This is what we're doing. We're preventing damage. And the practice of taking the right pictures so you have all the documentation you need to prove that you're not at fault before the damage occurs is exactly what you need to do to prevent the damage. So when we're talking about documentation for defending damage, we're really talking about documentation of the best practices to prevent damage.
I think one of the things that you said is the whole scope of the job. I know that we had talked about you could be working on one corridor and they could be multiple people working there, and you have to prove that you weren't on that side of the street. And so your photographs need to be broad enough to show that. Kenny, I think you were the one who had referenced that. Do you want to speak to that piece?
Yes, we're currently have a claim from a utility that said that we had actually damaged their facility, and they're charging us an exorbitant amount of money because of that. And you know, like some of the things that I just said earlier, we do have photos of where we were at, and completely on the opposite side of the street. Coincidentally, there at the same time that another contractor was there on the opposite side of the street, drilling across towards us. And actually got into the utilities fiber optic company, and they were you know, we're denying it, you know, because we have proof, and we're going to be able to prove that it wasn't us that was there. And sometimes these companies just look and see that there were, you know, people were there. And you have to, unfortunately for you, you're going to have to prove that you weren't there. And through GPS and all the things that we have available to us today, you know, you can't have enough to make your proof, because unfortunately, when you get these bills, they don't come in the day after, and everybody's mind is fresh and clear about what happened yesterday. In most cases, they are well down the road when you receive them, like this one was for us. And we're able to go back and and have enough information to deny the claim because we know what happened.
It is not unusual for claims to come in years after the event happened. I wish I could say it was, but like Kenny said, it's not when right after the event happens or when somebody's still on the job. It's months and years go by, and we need to be able to retrieve the information if we're going to successfully defend the claim.
Well, cross bores happen 10 and 20 years after the bores, the sewer lines.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
That's a big national problem, cross bore with pulling gas lines through sewers, and all is okay until somebody has a blockage and they go through with the cutter and just blow up the whole world. And you can be right back to that.
That statute of limitations brings up one of the questions from the chat, and this is more about billing, but the person thought there was a 3-year limit on billing. So Kenny, the story that you had referenced earlier with the sewer bore, were you still able to bill for that 8 years later? Do you know?
No. I mean, we were guilty. I mean, in that particular case, we were guilty. We did do it. We had a crew on site. At the time, though, I say we were guilty. It was a subcontractor that we had employed. Again, it was a subcontractor. A lot of, there's one thing that I would like to say to everyone. One of the things that you really should be aware of is that subcontractor that's working for you is you. I mean, at the end of the day, that's you and your reputation that's out there. Now, we hold them accountable and harmless through our subcontract agreements. But at the end of the day, it's you out there doing it, and they're going to come looking for you to begin with, right? So treating them no different than what you treat your own teammates or employees is essential to hold them to the same standard, and we do that very well here, and we'll always do that. You know, if they're not meeting and not playing the game like they should be, then they're not going to work for me. They're just not going to work for me.
I would say one of the other things you don't want to forget in it, when we talk about that 3-year limitation, earlier in the discussion, we talked about these jurisdictional differences. Those are aspects of state law as well in most cases. So maybe it is 3 years somewhere, maybe it's 7 years somewhere, maybe it's 20 years somewhere. Statutes of limitation and statutes of repose are very different. Some are from the time when the act occurred. Some are measured from the time when it was discovered. There are myriad of differences in state law, so you need to understand that going into your defense as well.
In the chat, we do have another comment about private versus public, and it says we've run into private utilities in a public right-of-way that were not members of a utility marking service. So don't assume that just because the project has been located that all utilities have been located.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in some jurisdictions, some buried facility owners are not required to be members of the 811 organization. So we have that with some of the water districts. I know in Texas, we've run into that before. There are collection lines for the oil industry in Pennsylvania where some of those lines are not required to be marked under the 811 law. There are other situations that are similar to that in various parts of the country. Again, it's jurisdictional, so it's not just private. Sometimes it's a facility you think would be otherwise marked, but isn't.
That's also a great point for the need for looking for surface indications of facilities below. So, you know, as the excavator, you can deduce that there's something in your space because you can see a box on a building that's headed your way. And the same is true for facilities in the right-of-way. If you can see a surface indication of something below and you don't do something about it, you don't call the utilities back out to say, what is this? And you go ahead and hit the darn thing, you're gonna pay for it because you can readily see that it is there. So, you know, it's a really complex world for the excavator, and it's a great responsibility.
We have a great point from Jordan that not only are the above ground photos key for everything, but so are the underground videos for contractors who do directional boring. Having the sewer mains and laterals pre and post inspected can save you cost and a possible cross bore. And then Kenny, he complimented you and Team Fishel for doing a great job at that. So is that one of the requirements that you have in place? It's one of the policies that you follow on every job, or is it a case by case?
It is, as far as the our thing is, and one of the things that, customers, you should, those of you that aren't doing it, you should probably go to your customer, because in a lot of ways it just makes good sense for them to compensate you for going that extra mile, just to keep, the liability and the problem that they have and encounter with damages. But I can't say enough for a company that you can hire on as a subcontractor that will go out and GPR everything for you. We are currently doing projects right now here for our customer in the Tampa area, where we are on both right-of-way and private property every day, all day long. And it is essential for us to have a company come in, GPR, soft dig, locate, map out a clean spot for us to put our utility in at that point in time. And that saves us. I'm not going to tell you that it completely alleviates everything for you, because unfortunately we still wind up damaging the small drops that are out there from communication companies, and damage those at times. But for the most part, we are able to mitigate all of those utility structures that are in the ground, and that just popping manhole lids and looking and finding up, depths, using everything at your disposal, because if I get the question, we don't camera any of those, which is not something that we do. We won't camera any of them, but we do use every other tool at our disposal to try to locate them.
It's problematic.
In cases where we can't, we just don't. I mean, that's one of the hardest things to tell your customer is, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it because of the consequences that I know that can derive from it, and to be able to stand up and let your customer know that. One of the things is, people that I deal with, they know that when I come to them, because I don't do it, it's not all the time and it's rare, but when I do, they know that I'm serious and that there's a real issue here, and that you need to hear what I'm telling you. We're not going to do this until we can find this utility. It's essential that you do that.
The contractor's been dealt a really bad hand in terms of the sewer laterals, because and the chat is pointed out a number of times that they just don't get marked, and the only way to find them is go to a clean out and put a wire through it and locate it. But oh my gosh, talk about something that's expensive, but a crossbore is expensive too.
Yes.
In the chat, we've had it come up of terminology, and maybe it's a little murkier, could be clearer. And we've had that coming up as well with within our industry with the term professional excavator. It might not accurately represent the company that's doing the work, because there's a wide variety of excavators. So Fred, would you speak to some of the confusion that could arise when we refer with the universal term?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I struggle with as I look at data from the industry, looking at the DIRT report and some other data that's out there. We talk about damages that are caused by professional excavators. Well, professional excavators encompasses a broad spectrum of folks that are out there. It can be the utilities themselves. It could be a utility contractor who's putting miles of fiber or gas line in the ground every day. Or it could be a plumber who calls in 4 tickets a year because once in a while he's got to dig somewhere to connect a line. Or it could be an electrician who the only time he ever has to call in a dig ticket is when he's putting in street lights and he has to run underground wiring for that. And he does 2 jobs a year where he does that. They fall into that professional excavator category. So I think trying to understand the differences in who a professional excavator is important. And I think we ought to make those distinctions. I think it's one of the issues that we have in the industry right now, trying to figure out where the problems are and what we ought to do to try to address those. And I don't know how we get there, because we need to make that determination, I think, if we're going to get to the root cause of the issue.
Wayne, did you have anything that you would wanted to add on that?
So over time, I've had clients get frustrated because their insurance carrier just quickly paid a claim when the contractor says he's not at fault. Fred, I think it would be good for you to, maybe illustrate how your teams work on claims, because I recognize your group is doing a really good job.
Well, we have a lot of conversations with our customers when they report a claim. We have a conversation with them. A lot of times they know if they're at fault. If they don't think they're at fault, we're going to try to make an effort to defend it if they don't think they're at fault. The question becomes, what evidence can you give me so that I can formulate a defense? And as we've talked throughout this discussion, just because your foreman says, well, I didn't do that, I can't base a defense on that. We've got to have something more to go on. But you should have those conversations with your insurer when you're talking to the adjuster and say, yeah, we got this claim in, but we ought to defend this because it's we didn't do this and I can prove it. If you have that kind of a discussion with your adjuster, in most cases, if your insurer should be working with you to formulate that defense to argue against you paying the claim.
You always want your insurance carrier to know your best practices as an excavator to prevent damage. It's in your best interest to show them, a sample job, and here's all the photos we take. So if anything ever happens, please know that this is what we do on every job, and they'll be right there for you.
Yeah,
I know that
having those ongoing communications with your insurer are absolutely vital. You should all be. It's a partnership, right? Your insurer is going to be successful if you're successful. If you're successful, they'll be successful, and there should be a joint venture in trying to solve these issues as you go through it.
Speaking of that level of success, Kenny, will you let us know what your recent track record is for Team Fishel?
It was, it's been a long time coming. We recently, every year we have all the numbers that come out, and we have a goal as a company. And this year, the company actually lowered or raised, I guess, the bar, to do even better this year. Here in our Plant City operations, greater Tampa area, we were able to fall under all and come in all of our scores and in the green this past year for driving, for teammate safety, injuries and job damages. And a lot of that success has just come from, and we did that. Here's the thing that really just blew our minds here locally. We did that hiring about 112 people in 2022 on top of it. And to add the mix of all new people coming in, which is generally your problem areas with new teammates that come in, not knowing the ways of the land, to achieve that score was even more impressive, for us here, and a very proud moment to celebrate that at the end of the year last year.
So just to give you a little perspective of the volume that Kenny is doing, I think in the last 6 months I checked, they had like 5,000 tickets. This is not small potatoes. to go without damage with that many tickets is incredible.
I know too, if you're a smaller contractor, you would think, well, of course they could have all of these resources and things, but what can I do as a smaller? And Wayne, I know that you've shared some checklists within the state of Florida for different things. So would you speak to some of the items that are on that checklist that regardless of size and resource, anybody is able to do?
Well, the primary strategy, of course, reviewing the positive response, but I had a client that had literally hundreds of small subcontractors working for them, and this contractor agreed to support, challenge, defend all damage claims that came through if the subcontractor could produce one thing, and that was photos of locate marks. So I was the guy who saw the claims come through, and there was no claims coming through, and the key strategy was taking the pictures. It's about having the contractor's head in the game and looking for what's wrong, and that simple strategy is the most effective of all.
We had talked about the photos being taken by a drone, flying the right of way with a drone, and getting a complete aerial picture from that sort of top-down view prior to excavation having some value. And it's something I'm not seeing a lot of, but it seems to me like it would be a very valuable tool because you get the whole picture, right? It's you get a look at everything.
Well, I think there was a point. Oh, go ahead, Kenny.
You guys will not, you just wouldn't believe, and I know, Wayne, you have experience at doing this as well, but the photo that you get from above versus standing on the ground and trying to see a picture very one-dimensional, you open up the whole three-dimensional world when you're up above it taking those pictures. And look, even for a small business, the cost of a small drone that will be able to get up there and do that is relatively very inexpensive. One claim obviously pays for it and then some. So it's not an expensive tool to use, and not difficult to train people to use it. So and a lot of the laws have relaxed as far as airtime and space, that you can be in and where you can. So as long as you're under a certain size, but it's huge. I mean, I could not believe, one of our guys actually brought his own drone in and he says, I'm gonna take pictures of this. And he said, I want you to see what it looks like. And he did. And I went out the next day and I bought a drone, to use.
I think one of the things that you said too is that, the price point on those have really come down. Some of the things to get your licensure to fly a drone is more relaxed. So I think that that's definitely something, and Raymond's here. He's reminding that, both the pictures from both the excavator and the locator are just important. There is a question of, could there be more accountability for as-built uploading? It seems that there are more utilities in the ground with zero record of where it is. And we've spoken to this a little bit in the past of, acquisitions and coming in with no map. So it may not be the current facility owner that you're looking at. They might not know what's missing as well. Fred, do you want to speak to that first?
There's certainly a move within the country to see those sorts of things happening. Some recent changes to Colorado law, California law, several other states are moving toward this idea of when you put something in the ground that you have to provide that information back to the state on where you've put your buried facility. We're a long way from having the entire underground mapped, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. And it is one of the things that's a really difficult thing. Over the years, we've put stuff in the ground and not kept track of where it is. And this whole industry is struggling with that decision that was made way back when to allow that sort of thing to take place. So, but I think we'll see more and more of it. And one of the things that's really interesting about it is there's a lot of technology that's allowing us to do that. There are multiple systems out there now in the directional drilling industry where after you do your pullback, it will give you a map in 3 dimensions of where they left that facility. And we need to find places to upload that data to make it retrievable for future use. And that's what we have to get to down the road.
We did have a question or more of a comment come in. Wayne, it seems like you have some disagreement in the audience with the photos being the most important. So Grant, you're able to unmute yourself, and he's going to let you know what he views as the most important tool. So Grant, if you'd also give us your background in locating, just so they understand the perspective that you're coming in with.
Sure, thank you, and pleasure to meet everybody. I've been doing this for almost 34 years now. I've owned a locate company for plus 20, two locate companies actually. And I do a lot of damage investigations, worked with a lot of lawyers and claims adjusters, and I do a lot of expert witness testimony. And I do have a training company that I teach damage prevention and excavators how to dig safely. So I have a lot of experience in this, and I agree with you that photos are good. But when I teach, it's more or less, once you understand the technology that is being employed out there when locating, EM locate equipment, we're not tracing gas lines, we're not tracing fiber lines, we're tracing a signal, an EM signal we're placing on a buried facility. And with that being said, that signal can distort, if you have congested facilities, if it's not being done properly. But what the root cause is people make mistakes. Locators make mistakes. People that are interpreting the marks make mistakes. The paperwork may have been done improperly, or they did the wrong work area. And really what, my company's name is Own Your Safety. And it really comes down to the individual who is digging on those marks to own their safety, to really understand what those marks mean, right? But it goes one step further, because here in Ontario, I'm in Canada. Actually, I'm in Dallas, Texas, but one of my companies is in Ontario. We have to make sure that the marks make sense, and understanding what utility infrastructure is and what all appurtenances or utility structures above ground mean. So at the end of the day, the photos this whole forum is great about damage claims and making sure we document, as the excavator, what's been done. But at the end of the day, it's really understanding what is in the ground, because that paperwork sometimes is wrong. And yeah, you can document all you want, and if you have a damage, you're off the hook. But at the, if someone gets injured, you still have to deal with that and mitigate that, and it's a whole thing. So the biggest thing for me is, when I'm teaching, is don't just look at the paper and say, yeah, those are the marks and that's exactly where it is. Because you know what? If you're not looking around and saying, oh, there's a fire hydrant there, but that's not on my paperwork, or these excavators need to be looking around and understanding what all those structures are, because if they don't get it, how do they check the paperwork to make sure it's right? You're relying on a professional, sure, but at the end of the day, locating is not an exact science. And sometimes these guys are going in blind, especially when you're on a private property. That's a whole other, ball of, big issue that, I could talk on hours on that. So, when you have mapping, these locators should be doing it properly, but mistakes happen. So we really have to make sure that, has everything in my work area been captured? Is there a telephone pedestal right there? Oh, why isn't that on my paperwork? So I do agree with you, Wayne, taking photos to make sure that your work area is right, but those excavators or those people really need to be reviewing the paperwork to make sure that it matches what's in their work area. And I think that's lacking in the industry. They just take that paperwork as face value, that's what's there, but they're not going that extra step of understanding what's in the ground, right? And there's a whole lack of education around that surrounds that. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you for
your thoughts. Wayne, did you have anything to add on that?
I think that's well said, and that's why my concern is that, having talked to hundreds of crews in the field and find very low recognition of what the positive response is. So if they don't know what the term positive response means, Grant's right, there's no way that they're understanding what that positive response is and does. So there is a great need for education. And I saw an earlier comment that most of the 811s have liaisons who are more than willing to go out and help you. And if you have a locate problem, there's not a liaison on the planet that won't jump in there and help you resolve it. So the 811s provide great resources that we really need to utilize as contractors and friends of contractors.
I touched on this a little bit before, that there are many hidden costs in a utility strike. Some of them are not covered by insurance, whether that's downtime for your crew that was on site when the event happened, whether it's equipment that's laid up while you wait to solve a problem, the administrative cost of researching records. You know, we want to defend claims, but it's not free to do that. There's effort that's involved in it. I was talking to the risk manager for a foundation contractor in California a few months ago, and he's tried to make it clear to his folks that, hey, even if it's not our fault, if we hit something, we've already lost. It's going to cost us in some sort of way. So I think that's an important thing to remember. So doing what you can do to avoid the hit in the first place is way better than trying to defend it after the fact. But doing whatever you can is to avoid the accident in the first place will pay off in great dividends.
Two things that have come through in the chat that I want to be able to point out is ASE 75 is the nation's first and only engineering standard on how to create a utility record. So I'm sure if you are not familiar, please visit ASE and familiarize yourself with that. Jim Onspach is on this conversation and is a leading resource, obviously, for that standard. And then Ed Landgraf had also commented, for those that are working with underwater pipeline, which sometimes we'll use the phrase waterway, but it's really any water. It can be a river or a stream. You don't need to think broad open water. Ed is a great resource for any underwater pipelining that you're going to be doing, whether you have some locating to do or there was a strike or you have a claim going on. So Ed's dropped his contact in there as well as the information for Camo. And that is a great resource. We still have some comments coming through in the chat, but as we wrap up, I want to kind of remind everybody that our main focus for this is working on solutions and finding what we can do to move things forward. So what's a solution that someone could take? Fred, you've talked about that documentation and record storage. Do you have another takeaway that you'd want somebody to have?
No, I think realizing that's an important part of this is the most critical thing. And Wayne's talked about the importance of photos. That's certainly part of it. I think Grant talked about some of the other documentation. Yeah, other documents are important too. Project plans and work records and those sorts of things. Kenny talked about the importance of knowing who your people were and when they were there and, you know, what equipment they had out there. All of those things can come into play when we're trying to defend a claim. And having that in some retrievable format is absolutely vital. So like I said, but there are some software and cell phone applications that can help you accomplish that. So I'd look into that.
Wayne, your takeaway of something that someone could do at this point?
Well, I think, you know, this conversation is kind of a key thought process, you know, talking through what makes a difference for people in the field and finding ways to communicate it to even more people out there. Education is key. I find, you know, the checking the positive response, just throwing it out there, please guys do this. And when Kenny says teammates review the positive response, guess what? They review the positive response. So the management leadership is key and critical, and I'm glad to have Kenny here today to illustrate the impact, the positive impact of management leadership that says there'd be no excuse for damage. If we can prevent damage, we will.
Kenny, your final thoughts?
You know, real quick, it each and every day it comes to the boots on the ground, right? I mean, to do the right thing, and to Grant's point, you know, he's at that point in time, he's your last line of defense out there. He's got to care enough to act on what he sees when he looks at that positive response and sees that it says no facilities in the area, and you're standing there and you can see gas markers in all 4 directions from where you're standing, at that point in time, you've got to call someone and ask a question and not just go, oh, it's not on my locate ticket, so I'm clear. Well, at the end of the day, you're not going to be clear when you hit that utility. So your guys are critical out there in the field to do the right things, and you set expectations, as Wayne said, and the expectations are to do those right things. Not at 100 out of 100 times do they happen, but I would bank on saying somewhere in the 95 or better out of 100 times it happens. And we're striving every day to have a world-class safety team here, and we have one put together, and we are doing our best exercise heading in that direction right now.
Thank you. We do have, Roger, you have the ability to unmute if you have a final comment. We are at time. Are you able to unmute? I will keep moving forward. Roger, if you do have a question or a comment, you can put it in the chat. We can send it out to everybody who participated today, but I do want to thank everyone for joining us. I appreciate everybody sharing their thoughts and their concerns and digging into what some potential solutions are. So please take a moment now to fill out. We have a brief survey that Levi will post in the chat, so we can continue to improve our discussions and address the topics that are important to you. Please note on this survey, there is an additional field if you'd like to provide your preferred mailing address, and you can receive a complimentary copy of our 2023 Excavation Safety Guide. So on behalf of everyone at Infrastructure Resources, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. And as a reminder, a recording of this town hall will be posted on excavationsafetyalliance.com, where you'll be able to register for future virtual town halls. Our next is on May 11th, and coincidentally, we will be discussing cross-bore prevention, so 20 years of effective results. Still this month, we'll be celebrating ELSA to honor the locators and all that they do. May 16th and 17th, we'll be hosting the Global GPR Congress, which is a free event in partnership with Bigman Geophysical. And to all of our panelists, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. We look forward to seeing you all again next month. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.